So open your heart and open your soul. Your life will be complete when you give God control.
What I'm about to tell you actually happened. This is not a parable. This is not a symbolic story. These are real events, as told to the secretary by the person it happened to, okay? There was a girl living in the Italian countryside. A very, very, very poor family. Farmers, very, very poor. The girl's name, this is her real name, Magdalena. That's her real name. Magdalena had a great dream of someday going to Rome, finding, the big life, the dramatic life, making lots of money, and lifting her family out of poverty. And even though, she was living a very kind of a sheltered life way out in the country, everything she had was Rome. She'd get magazines and look at fashion, and she had this real kind of romantic, glamorous dream of the big life. So she would write to friends, and she would write to magazines, do you have any jobs? I'm looking for work. And, not much came. One day she got a letter, handwritten letter, and it said, we received your letter, and if you want to come to Rome, we think we can get a job for you. Well, she was just ecstatic. So she showed her parents the letter, and they said, well, who are you going to be staying with? Oh no, this is all very organized. It's very set. This is all good. So the parents who didn't have much money, spent a little bit more, got her a nice dress, got her some things, put her on a train, and we're so proud of you, and you think of us when you're in Rome, and she was kind of like the hero of the family. So she goes to Rome, and she's met at the train station. Some guy is there, and he says, well, we're going to need a few more days to get the job together, but we have a place for you to stay. We got some other girls who are looking for jobs. You can stay with them for a couple days. And a couple more days, they said, well, that job didn't turn out, unfortunately, but we think we can have something else for you in a few more days. Meantime, you stay with these girls. You just stay in these apartments. Eventually, you can imagine what happened. She got completely pulled into the whole sex trafficking thing, and she got addicted to some serious drugs, and she had to support her addiction through prostitution. Now, this girl was raised a good Catholic girl in the countryside, and this whole life was so against everything she believed in. And at first, her parents would write her letters. We haven't heard from you. Dear Mama, the new job is going good. And she would put a few dollars in from her prostitution. But she couldn't live the lie anymore. So she told them about this great job she had, and eventually she just didn't write them. They would send her letters, and she didn't know how to respond to this. She couldn't live with the shame and the guilt, and yet she didn't feel she could go home. So she was trapped in this life, living this life, hating herself more and more and more. And it seemed like a complete dead end, like this is over. How could I have been so foolish? How could I have trusted these people? Anger, betrayal, all of that. So one night, now this is back to the bridge. One night at 4 o'clock in the morning, after coming home from another horrible night, she stops on the bridge and she says, I can no longer live in this pain. I can no longer live with this shame. Nobody's out, completely quiet, completely empty. Magdalena throws one leg over the rail on the bridge, and she is ready to jump. Now this is what she says. I wasn't there. This is what she said. As she was ready to jump, she heard somebody call her name, Magdalena. And she said, I've never heard my voice, my name spoken with such love. She says, she turned And standing there was Jesus Christ. Tears running down his face. And he simply said, Magdalena, why are you doing this to me? Don't you know how much I love you? And she was so overwhelmed that fortunately she fell back onto the bridge. She fell back on the bridge. She's laying there on the pavement, and he's standing there. She said it was so overwhelming she could not look at him again, but his feet, she was laying at his feet. She grabbed him by the feet, and she cried and cried. All this shame, all this guilt, all this anger poured out of her onto these feet. And she said, I felt, as I held his feet, I felt all that was coming out of me was going into him. And I felt nothing but love and compassion and healing going into me. And immediately I'd have a flashback. And I remember the first time I was with this guy and the horrible things he did to me. And all of a sudden, I felt this wave of love from Jesus. And that vision no longer had power over me. And then I thought of the time when I first injected, and I was so angry with myself. And all of a sudden, this love came over me. And that vision lost its power over me. She says, I laid there and I cried, and every single sin and memory poured out of me. And he received it. He took it all into himself and exchanged for everything I did, everything he did for me. And I felt love. I felt healing. I felt restored. And she says, I don't know how long I lay there, maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Which is when I finally came to, whatever that means. She rested in the spirit, or was she out cold? I don't know. Whenever I came to, he was gone. But I still felt him with me. And she says, I got up, I went back to my little apartment, and I woke up all the other girls. And I told them about the man on the bridge. And I was free. And I don't have to do this anymore. Now the interesting thing is, the secretary told me, Magdalena never went back home. She still lives in that neighborhood. She still lives in a little apartment. And in that particular neighborhood in Rome, prostitution and drug abuse has almost come to a complete end. Because to this day, Magdalena goes around, and when she sees anybody who might listen, she doesn't, read chapter and verse. She doesn't read long Vatican documents. She tells them about the man she met on the bridge who gave her her life back. Now I want to draw a connection between that story and the prodigal son. Coming to his senses, he said, what am I doing? And he turned and headed home. As near as I can tell, Magdalena didn't come to her senses. She was so blinded by her pain and agony and shame, she was in the process of committing suicide. She didn't have any revelation, say, oh my goodness, now is my time to turn to God. She is so racked and overwhelmed with darkness, she sees this lie as her only solution. Remember, we said the devil always offers you something that looks good initially. I got to get out of this pain. She, if you will, never came to her senses at that moment. Here's the point I want to make. When the boy turned to his senses and moved towards the Father ran to him. In Magdalena's case, at that point yet, she had not come back to her senses, and Jesus came to her. So let's remember that God is the arbitrator of mercy. We are not. And before we make people jump through too many hoops, let's realize that it's up to God to save people the way He wants to save them. It's time for all of us to back off a little bit and to be sure that God is in the center of the mercy ministry. We all need to run with the Father where He's running and do whatever the Father says. We all need to walk with Jesus out to the bridge over the Tiber and just be there. And before we start telling people, these are the 5 things you have to do to receive my mercy, maybe we all need to shut up and spend more time at the side of Jesus. And let's do what Jesus did. Jesus says, I only do what I see the Father doing. Well, why don't we all do what we see Jesus doing? So maybe there's more to mercy than we can comprehend. Maybe there's a mystery here that doesn't always make sense. Maybe there's a mystery here that doesn't always add up number-wise. Maybe there's a mystery here that we don't understand. Maybe we need to spend more time with the person of mercy, that we can authentically become persons of mercy. God bless you.
Lord, send your Spirit and fall afresh on us. Fill us with your power, Lord, and fill us with your love. Lord, send your Spirit and fall afresh on us.